Hey everybody, it's Jeff, and here's what I did today for Workbench, where I stream my open source innovation work on Twitch. So after working on these Apple Go binding generation project stuff and porting that panel UI kit for a bit, I realized I needed to get back to the main critical path of this big project. So I came back to this tree view and inspector UI prototype that I was working on a bit ago. So the, let's see, it looks like this if you don't remember. So the inspector is basically, it was originally a pretty simple component made up of property sets, which are a named set of fields that you can change and maps to like a single object. Previously, a property set would iterate over the fields and place property fields, like this field and field, this property field. And each of those is basically a row in the inspector here. So each of these fields, it's a label and then the actual input. I actually decided to remove the property field. And I also kind of simplified the CSS for now. But I moved a lot of that into the loop of the property set. So it kind of looks like this now. I have the name and the input. And then the main thing here is I need to do a kind of a different input depending on the type. So like a text box for a string, checkbox for a Boolean. This led me down a path where I was trying to figure out how to place pre-made HTML bits into a template from a variable that were defined in Go, maybe in your render function. So JSX in React, you can just put a variable in line with other HTML to insert any element that variable has, whether it's a component or HTML. And so you can create some code. Oftentimes you might have expressions in your JSX that would take a variable, map over it, and then return an element for every element, stuff like that. We can't really do that here. So although I kind of tried it, played around with that idea, instead I went with what Vue does for dynamic elements. Or dynamic components, where you have a component and a variable. You can actually use a component, I guess, or component tag, and you just bind its is, and that would basically replace it with that component. I realized though that this isn't as expressive as what you can do with JSX, where you can just have a variable in line, because sometimes it's not just a component, it might be just some pre-made HTML that you had, and that's what I needed to do here. So because really I just needed to render an input. I ended up implementing something like component in vTemplate, and I renamed it to Node and made it support either HTML or components. And so it would look something like Node is, and you would probably do a bind, and so my component or HTML, and then in your Go you can kind of just set that up as another variable, and you could build that with if you wanted to, you could render another template, but the point of it usually is to build something using Vectee's weird kind of like functional API for building elements and stuff like that. Then I threw all that away because I ended up just making a component called property input that would then do that and switch on its kind and give you the right input based on that. So even though I implemented node or dynamic components like this, I didn't end up using it, but it's in there now. And it works pretty well. Like, it will also copy over any attributes that you put on the node tag to whether it's a component or the outer element of the HTML. And so my property input basically supports, you know, booleans, ints, floats, and strings. And you can see how that looks. You saw it before. And then the other, and this is, you know, it's been a while since I've done HTML stuff. HTML5 just is constantly introducing new stuff. I love that there's actually a number type now that gives you this little number picker thing. It even gives you in the DOM, a numeric way to access it, so you can get that value as a number, which is pretty cool. So before getting into more advanced types like references and slices and structs, and that's where it gets really interesting, I got it to set the data on the object it came from. So before it was just like showing the value. Now on input, or, you know, on input change, it just sets that value, pulls it out and sets it. And this is really kind of nice how straightforward it is, because I have the reflected value. I can just say set on it, grabbing, you know, the JavaScript event, and I have this callback here that is used to link it up so that I can persist all the data when those things change. So now you can change the data and come back. I don't know why that one is, there's this weird issue where the last one or the first one that you click gets mixed up with the others, but if I reload, that stuff is there. So it even updates the tree. And active changes its active state, which the active state, turns out the active state in the JS tree doesn't, it lets you disable elements, but when you disable them, you can't select them, and that's not how I want this to work. So I ended up just applying the class that JS tree would apply, but actually leaving it enabled. So that's a working inspector. It's pretty cool. And again, all this is being persisted in the local storage for now. So when I come back to this, I'll start working on the advanced types it needs to support. Like references will be fun, because I want them to be settable from with drag and drop like Unity. So it can, you know, if 5 is the type of whatever the reference is, I can just drag that over and set it. And so that'll be pretty cool. Anyway, that's it for now. Pretty good progress, feels like. Even if this was a sort of low energy recap, it's been a busy day. So that's it for now. Thanks. And let me know if you have thoughts or questions in the comments, and subscribe if you'd like to follow along on this project and all my other projects, or join me on Twitch Tuesdays and Thursdays. Thanks for watching. Bye.